Hey everyone, it's EverythingeeB here, and in today's video I am going to be ranking every single version of Windows ever made. As you know, Windows has had a lot of versions spanning from 1985 to 2021, so today we're going to be ranking everyone. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I don't run Windows anymore. I actually switched to Linux. If I can pull up my NeoFetch over here. But yeah, as you can see, I actually switched to Linux as my main daily driver for my laptop, and that's what I use now. I use it for everything basically, so I don't even use Windows anymore. So that's why we're going to be ranking every version of Windows. Now, as you can see, I have my tier list over here. I have every single version of Windows that we plan to rank today, and I have every version of Windows in VirtualBox as I'm gonna load it up here. And yeah, so here we go. We have all of the versions of Windows. So we're first going to start with Windows 1.0, which was, of course, the first version of Windows. Now, Windows 1.0 is kind of a complicated release, as you'll see here. So this is Windows 1.0. It took me like a couple of seconds to boot, but yeah, as you can see, it's not exactly the greatest thing. Especially in retrospect. I mean, like, people will say like, oh yeah, this was the first version of Windows, but keep in mind even Mac OS, System OS as it was known on Macs back then, was better than Windows 1.0 was. I mean, it had actual icons, it had actual graphics, you could overlay Windows, even though the Mac had 128 kilobytes of memory. But on the Windows machine, on Windows, you could see that you have this list that you can scroll through. Like, I don't even know what this is. Like, what is control? What does it control exactly? And yeah, overall, it wasn't very intuitive to use, like, at all. And there is mouse support, but I couldn't get it working, so that's why there's no mouse. So Windows 1.0 was definitely one of, like, not really a good release. So here's Windows 1.0 here, and I'm going to rank it at D tier, because I feel like that's the best place to put it. So I'll put it at D tier here. Now we'll move on to Windows 2. Alright, so now we're at Windows 2, and as you can see, things have kind of evolved a lot. So this one came out in 1987, and as you can see, like, you have an actual window here. And that was basically the theme of Windows 2.0, was just multitasking, being able to clip programs on top of each other. So for example, if I opened write.exe, you can minimize it using the minimize toggle here. And then if I open terminal, which the terminal, I guess, then you can see that I can kind of clip these over each other, like overlap. And yeah, overall it was a much better experience than Windows 1.0 was, mostly due to the fact that you could clip windows for the first time, and this actually resulted in a lawsuit from Apple, who wanted to claim that clipping was something they invented somehow. Anyways, so this was an okay release of Windows. So here in the ranking, I think I'll probably give it a C tier maybe, because I mean, it was alright, I guess. So now we're going to move on to the next version of Windows, and this one changes things up a lot. Alright, so now we're at Windows 3.0, and this is where you can start to see things actually get a lot better for Windows. This Windows 3.0 came out in the year 1992 or 1993, so like around 6 years after, but Windows 3.0 came out in like 1990. But you can see it was an immediate night and day difference. Like, they have actual icons now, they have a file manager, so you can actually view files properly, and this is where Windows really started to mature and become its own thing and actually beat Mac OS in a lot of areas, which is, it was still called System OS back then, but I'm just going to call it Mac OS just to avoid any confusion. But yeah, as you can see, we have actual icons for everything, and there's a very systematic way of getting through things. Like, it's not just a randomized list like it was before, but it's actually icons that you can actually read and stuff. So Windows 3.0, definitely one of the better versions of Windows, but the version after will be way better. For now, I'm just going to rank it at, if I can find it real quick, I think this is it. For now, I'm just going to rank it at an A tier. Windows 3.1 was very innovative and would lay the groundwork for the next version of Windows we're going to take a look at. Alright, so here is Windows 95, and I think this is Windows 95 anyways. But yeah, Windows 95 was an absolutely revolutionary version of Windows. You can see that we have an actual desktop now, and this looks very similar to what we have nowadays with Windows 10 and 11. You can see we got icons over here, so we got everything from My Computer, which lets you view your files on My Computer, to the recycle bin, which was a first on Windows, I think, where you could actually recycle files instead of them being permanently deleted, so you could go back and delete them later if you accidentally deleted it. We had Internet Explorer bundled in with later revisions of Windows 95, and we have the biggest change, which is the taskbar, which hosts all of our opened applications, and the start menu. Now, the start menu was absolutely revolutionary. It changed the way basically we interact with our computers, and you can see here we have everything organized into systematic categories. You got documents, where you can see your recently accessed documents. Got favorites, so you can see your favorites on the internet. Programs, see all your installed programs. Setting, find, and overall it was just a really organized version of Windows. For some reason it's locking up right now, I have no idea why. And yeah, so Windows 95 is definitely one of the best versions of Windows. And for Windows 95 over here, I think I'm putting it at S tier. This is very much an S tier release of Windows. So now we're at Windows 98, and this is where things kind of started stalling for Windows at this point, at least for the Windows 9X series. Windows 98 had a lot of quality improvement changes made to Windows 95. Obviously not as innovative as Windows 95, but that's because innovation isn't really something you can sustain. Like, you can't keep innovating forever and ever. But yeah, as you can see, Windows 98 is, they had a better version of the start menu compared to Windows 95, I guess. They had this active desktop, which unfortunately doesn't work anymore due to the fact that the web page shut off a long time ago. And overall, they have some really solid improvements to Windows, such as the example to play CDs straight out of the box, something that wasn't present in Windows 95 due to the hardware being too limited back then, I guess. But one thing that Windows 98 had for it was bugs. There were a lot of bugs in Windows 98, and so bad that they actually had to introduce Windows 98 Second Edition, which replaced the now called First Edition of Windows 98 in 1999. And Windows 98 Second Edition was issued to solve all the bugs, despite the fact that they had Windows Update on this version. Back then, 56K connections weren't good enough to send huge system updates that could change how your system functioned. So overall, Windows 98 is a pretty good release, but kind of plagued by bugs. And I think I'm going to give it, if I can find here, I think I'll give it maybe A tier, because it was still a really good release of Windows. Now, Windows Me, this is very self-explanatory, to be honest. Windows Me, although it did have some pretty good changes, really represented the end of the 9X lineup, and with one of the most buggy messes of an OS that we've probably ever seen to date. Windows Me, it's like undisputed, I guess, F tier. Yeah, this might be the only Windows operating system that gets an F tier in this entire video. Alright, so now we're at Windows 2000, and Windows 2000 was initially supposed to be a successor of the Windows NT4, which had come out before, but they decided to call it Windows 2000 because it was released in February 2000, and this was the first version of Windows to be based on the NT kernel, which made it a lot more stable under the hood compared to Windows 98 and especially Windows ME, and this would lay the foundation for all the future versions of Windows, as the future versions would also be based on the NT kernel. So Windows 2000, pretty minor upgrade. I guess it was a business release first, but then people made it this consumer release because they needed something to use other than Windows Me. So I'll put it at B tier because it was a pretty solid release of Windows. Alright, so now we've got Windows XP, and Windows XP is definitely one of my favorite versions of Windows. Like, everything is just so iconic about this version, and XP was definitely a really good version of Windows. Like, we had that iconic wallpaper, and we had an improved start menu with double columns instead of a single column like it was in earlier versions of Windows. This was also the first version for a lot of controversial changes as well. Like there was the Windows Genuine Activation, which would check your computer every time to see if your license was genuine. That really was a bad idea that Microsoft should have honestly not done, but they did it, and it's kind of like overlooked in Windows XP's legacy. But I think Windows XP was definitely one of the best versions of Windows. It belongs in the S tier. So I'm just gonna put it like right over here alongside Windows 95, where it'll join along with one more version of Windows. Now, Windows Vista, this is the release we're on now, by the way, was definitely one of the worst, more, it was received a lot worse than other versions of Windows were, and for good reason. It was kind of ahead of its time. Like, Windows Vista was very hard to run on the PCs that people were trying to upgrade to from XP. It wasn't exactly the smoothest runner. As well, it had a lot of blue screens, like a lot. Like there's still videos where you can see how many blue screens Vista had over its lifetime, and overall, it just gained a really negative reception. And by the time hardware and updates had catched up to give Windows Vista a good experience, Windows 7 was right around the corner. So Windows Vista definitely got forgotten. But I really personally like Vista. Like, I never actually truly daily drove it, but I still really like it from what I'm playing through with virtual machines and sometimes installing it on physical hardware. So Windows Vista, I think I'll probably give a C tier. It was definitely not a colossal failure like Windows Me was. Alright, so here we're at Windows 7, and Windows 7 is, again, a really good version of Windows, and it's definitely one of basically the last great version of Windows. Everything about it was just so much better than even its successors. Like, for example, the taskbar was better than its predecessors because you could actually really customize it for the first time. Like, you could use small icons, you could do auto hide. I don't know if auto hide was possible on XP and Vista. I mean, it possibly could have been, but to be honest, I'm not too sure about that. But yeah, as you can see, you could hide the taskbar, you could unhide the labels. So, I mean, you could non-combine the labels, so you could actually see the labels of whatever you were doing. And overall, Windows 7 was just a really good version of Windows, and it was one of the last truly great versions of Windows. Like, it had so much going for it, and compared to its successors, it innovates over the Windows formula a lot more than they do. So there's not really much to say about Windows 7. I mean, everyone likes Windows 7, or if they hated it before, they like it now in its demise. So Windows 7 on our tier list ranking will probably go up here to, the S tier, along with Windows XP and Windows Vista. And Windows 95. I didn't mean to say Vista. Windows 95 for being one of the truly great versions of Windows, if not the last, actually. Alright, so welcome to Windows 8, I guess. And yeah, the first change that you'll see with Windows 8 is the new start menu, or technically a start screen. Yeah, this screen filled up your entire screen, and this was an OS marketed towards desktop users as well. I mean, it was primarily made for tablet users, but it was also marketed to desktop users, and it was a nightmare if you were on desktop. First of all, there's no start button at the bottom. I mean, you could do this, but it kind of defeats the purpose, and there's no real way to actually trigger the start menu on tablet unless you open the charms menu and click that. I keep on calling it start menu, but on Windows 8, it's a start screen. And I'm doing 8 and 8.1 separately because 8.1 did include some improvements that I want to touch up on while I'm making this tier list. So yeah, Windows 8 was overall just really not a great version of Windows. They introduced Microsoft account support so that they could shove telemetry down your throat. But obviously, since this version was not really widely adapted, they also backported the telemetry to Windows 7 as well, meaning that if you're using Windows 7, it would end up giving you telemetry there as well. So it ruined Windows 7 as well, technically, and it was just a bad release of Windows altogether. Windows 8, I'm not going to give it an F tier, however, I am going to give it an E tier, So pretty darn close to F, to be honest. So Windows 8 introduced a lot of well-known features such as the start button being back. Not the start menu. The start menu was still there. They're planning to actually bring it back into... I keep on calling it start menu, but I actually mean start screen. Start screen's still there. They're planning to turn it into a menu on a cancelled update. And overall, 8.1 did have some quality of life improvements over Windows 8. Not enough to make people want to actually upgrade to Windows 8.1, but definitely some pretty quality of life updates. And yeah, 8.1 was, ever so slightly better than Windows 8. So I'll probably give it maybe, I was going to give it a C tier, but maybe I'll give it a D tier because people still didn't really like 8.1. They just wanted to stick with 7. Alright, so here we are to Windows 10, and Windows 10 was kind of a mixed release for me, because it's been a while since I've actually daily driven Windows 10. The last time I truly daily drove it was back last year in school. Otherwise, it's been a while since I daily drove it on my main computer, and as you can see, there were a lot of regressions in some areas, like for example in the start menu, there are a lot of advertisements in the start menu. Epic Games Launcher, I installed this myself, so you can't really say that's an advertisement, but there's other stuff, Spotify, Disney Plus, and even TikTok. Like what is TikTok doing on a Windows operating system? It just doesn't make any sense. And aside from that, they had some major consistency issues, especially once they introduced dark mode with how menus looked and stuff. And overall, Windows 10 went most of its life pretty neglected. It was supposed to get updates every 6 months, but the updates would either be majorly bricking or they wouldn't have enough changes to actually warrant updating. And the only time when you'd actually update is when the version you were running just ran out of support. So overall, Windows 10 is just not that great of a release, and I'll probably put it at C tier, to be honest. And now finally we get to the last version of Windows that we're going to be taking a look at, and that's Windows 11. Now Windows 11 might have actually had a worse reception than Windows 10 did. For starters, it had those ridiculous system requirements that didn't really let you upgrade if you didn't meet them, and even after the security requirements, it was just not a great OS. It did nothing really to improve Windows 10's, like a lot of Windows 10's errors, such as inconsistencies. I know that now they're improving it in updates, but I mean, it's still unstable, and it's still really overall, it just doesn't feel like a real new version of Windows. Like, this was the first version of Windows I think my dad hadn't upgraded to straight away. Like, it took a lot of convincing from me back when I actually liked Windows 11 to make him upgrade. And that just goes to show how Windows 11 is just not that great of a version of Windows. So Windows 11, I'm honestly going to put at a D tier. Maybe updates would make it shift towards maybe a C tier or even a B tier if somehow they managed to fix stuff. However, Windows 11 just has a lot of issues that I don't think they actually solved when they were going from 10 to 11. They just kind of brushed it off and said, oh, well, here's our new shiny version of Windows. And that's all I have for today's video. As you can see, this is our final result for the tier list. In S tier, we have 95, XP, and 7. A tier, we have 98 and 3.1. B tier, we have 2000. C tier, we have 2, Vista, and 10. D tier, we have 1, 8.1, 11. E tier, Windows 8, and F, Windows Me. So that's basically all we got. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you didn't, don't like, comment, or subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.